Well, I'm Patty Nethery with Ruler Revolution, and what I've done is I've invented a series of rulers, and they all have patents on them. We received our patents last week, so we'll be adding our numbers to our rulers. And one of the rulers that we've invented is called the Snowball Ruler, and it actually comes in two different sizes. And the difference in the two, if you look here on my table, there's two different blocks. These are both 6.5 inches, but the 4x4 ruler makes a little less shallow corner than the 3x3 makes a little deeper corner. These work well with a 4-patch block. These work with a 9-patch block. And what I'm going to be demoing on my table here is the 3x3 ruler. And the way it works is you take two squares, and these squares are 5 inches, which is a charm pack friendly square. Now the rulers are built to have 5 different measurements built into them, but you can snowball any size block or any size rectangle with these rulers. I take the ruler, and I'm going to take my fabric, and on the wrong side of the fabric, line up my ruler. And this is, again, a 5-inch square. So I just very quickly mark these little diagonal lines on all 4 corners, and then the vertical and the horizontal lines. And I'll show you in just a minute why I mark those extra lines. Then I'm going to take my other square, put right sides together, and then I just line them up and hold them in place while I sew them on my machine. Now I don't even pin them, because they'll stay lined up, and then I very quickly sew the corners. These are just perfect little blocks to use for a beginning quilting class in a shop. It also would be a great block for the shop owner to showcase maybe Christmas fabric that's been purchased at market. And then even a shop at home has used this as a charity block, and 2 teams worth of quilters came by the shop and made 96 of these little blocks in 90 minutes, and they did it as a relay between 2 teams, and the losing team had to buy the winning team lunch. So it was kind of a fun little way to get to know the ruler and the blocks. But I take my fingers and just kind of pinch these 2 blocks open, and then insert my scissors between the 2. Get it in here. Turn it over here. And then I'm just going to cut across the center of the block. And those little vertical and horizontal lines that I drew, this where this comes into play. Then I'm going to press the corners open. And I actually turn this block over when I cut it. You don't necessarily have to do that step. Once it's completely done here, I'm going to take my little square ruler, line up my little ruler with the top of my square, and just quickly check the 2 other points to make sure that it's lined up, and I'm going to cut these little slivers off. Now the larger the block gets, the larger these little slivers get. And what I do with them is when they get large enough, I'll just throw them in my scrap basket, and then I'll use them to do my little piano keyboarders with, like that. Now, once that step is completed, the last step is to cut these little ears off. And when I'm sewing these at home, I will actually double sew my corners so that I end up with these little bonus half square triangles. And by double sew, I mean skip over a 1/2 inch, sew all the way around. And then when you cut between the lines, you end up with those extra little half square triangles. So in essence, what I started out with was 2 squares, the same size, and then I'm going to end up with a snowball block, 4 half square triangles, and possibly some of the little units to make the piano border. But most importantly, it's very fast. Plus, we started at 5 inches and we end at 5 inches. There's no skewing on this block. And that's just the basic use of that ruler. Another way to use the ruler is to make perfect miters. And I call it miters in minutes. And it's still the same ruler that I was using, and these are the steps that one would go through. But in essence, for this project, this is what I'm going to end up with, but you can miter any size square or any size rectangle with this snowball ruler. So I've started out with a 12-inch square. I lay my ruler on the 12-inch square and I just mark the diagonal corners like so. Then I take a 1/4-inch tape, and I've been using the Wonder tape to do this with, or you can even use heat and bond, cut your own little strips. But you put 2 1/4-inch strips on each side, press it under, turn it around, and do the other 2 sides with your 1/4-inch. Once that's finished, you have a perfect little completed edge here. Plus, it makes it easy for the person that can't turn under and press a perfect little edge. And by doing that technique, when you pinch this corner to make the miter, the little corner kind of pops out, and that helps you line up this edge. Once it's lined up, then you sew across the diagonal line that you've drawn, and you actually do that 4 different times on all 4 corners. So you end up with this little box, a little unit that looks like a box. The next step is to trim your corners to where you have a 1/4-inch seam allowance, miter them, press them open, and then turn the unit right side out. And then I've taken 2 layers of batting and then a little coordinating fabric, but this can be a focus fabric that you can even fussy cut to put in the middle. This can be embroidered, appliqued, whatever. But you take your little stack, put it on top of your frame, and then I take a purple thing, it's the little tool, and I just start pushing it in between the 2 layers. Once I have it positioned inside, I'll run the little purple thing around the edge, and it just smooths it all the way down. Plus, I'll take and push out my corners with the other end of the little tool. Once it's all together, then I go back and sew this opening closed, and then a 1/4-inch away on the edge. Now this little opening here can be sewn with a decorative stitching and just kind of pretty it up a little bit. But we have a pattern that goes along with the ruler, and we call it miters in minutes, and it looks like this. And you can make a baby changing pad, a placemat, coasters, and then a hot pad, all with the same technique and pattern, and it makes it very fast. And as I mentioned a while ago, you can miter any size rectangle or square. Well, I use the same technique even as large as this piece is. And this little changing mat, you can fold it in thirds, and then it has some little tabs that closes it up. So just a really quick project with the ruler. Those are the basics of the Snowball Ruler, and that's only the beginning. The sky is the limit with it. This quilt that's back here on the back wall, the blue and yellow quilt, that's also made with the Snowball Ruler. And the technique used on that is starting out by strip piecing and then create a 9 patch, and then I snowballed the 9 patch, cut the 9 patch apart, and then took these little units, twisted and turned them, and came up with this pattern. Of course, they could be turned other directions and completely change that pattern. But let me show you how to snowball any size corner if you're not doing it with 2 squares. This would be the technique that I would use if I was snowballing like a rectangle, or if I wanted to snowball the corners with different fabrics, different sizes, or maybe I just want to snowball 1 corner, 2 corners, 3 corners, or make these corners match. The way it works is you take your large piece of fabric, it could be a square or a rectangle, take the Snowball Ruler and draw your corner that you decide the size that you want to make. Then cut your squares, and in this instance I'm doing 4 corners, and I'm doing them all the same size, so I cut my squares to they're just a little bit larger than where this point comes out on the corner. Take the large square to the machine along with your other squares. Take one of your little squares at the machine, slip it under, and sew on that diagonal line. Turn the whole unit under the machine, take another square, slip it under, and sew it. So in this instance, you've sewn 4 squares. Press it out, take the little square ruler like I was showing a while ago, cut off your little corners, and then cut off the ears on the back, and you have your perfect little snowball here. But the Sticks and Stones ruler is designed to make multiple units at a time, and traditionally we've made these units where you take 1 rectangle, 2 little bitty squares, you draw a mark on the squares, put them on the corners, sew across them, and invariably the machine wants to eat one of your little corners, or it will actually skew your block when it's done. Well, with this method and the ruler, you actually end up with perfect units every time. And the Sticks and Stones ruler comes in two different sizes, a 2.5 inch and a 2 inch. And if you look at this board back here behind me in the middle, it shows all the units that you can make with this ruler. And I'm going to be demoing the 2.5 inch ruler, and I'm going to be making these little slanted diamond units. And they're called slanted diamond units because whenever you sew them in your project, they actually end up looking like a slanted diamond. So for this example, I've taken two 2.5 by 10 rectangles and then a 5 by 10 rectangle. With right side up on the large rectangle, lay the 2.5 inch by 10 inch rectangles on top and butt the little edges here in the center. Then I'm going to take my ruler, line up the top of the ruler with the top of my fabric units, and I'm going to draw a diagonal line in these little diagonal slots. Then I'm going to take my pencil and I'm going to draw a line in the vertical slots. Slide the ruler up, and you'll notice that these seam lines are parallel to each other, so I want to draw my lines parallel to each other on the bottom. So once it's drawn, it looks like this. I take it to the machine and I sew on those diagonal lines back and forth, like so. Once I've sewn the unit, take my scissors, take my rotary cutter and my straight edge and cut the vertical lines that I've drawn. Once it's cut apart, press these units open, go back, trim off the ears on the back on each side, and you have your perfect slanted diamond unit. Now I've made 4 here on my board, but if I wanted to, I could cut these fabric strips longer. Just draw off my ruler, lift it up, draw it again, just as I could keep going just as long as my fabric is. Still the same sewing back and forth and then cutting on the vertical line. So that's called Sticks and Stones.